Andrew Cuomo, in an attempt to fearmonger over Zoran Mamdani, has been pushing the narrative that Zoran wants prostitution to be fully legal. In reality, the only position he has publicly stated is that he is in favor of prostitution being instead decriminalized. But whatever, fuck it. Let's buy into Andrew Cuomo's framing that Zoran has advocated for the full legalization of prostitution. Based. Like drug possession, I have never understood why prostitution is not legal in this country. For starters, just like taking drugs on your own accord, victimless crime. So long as, like, the sex worker isn't someone who was kidnapped and trafficked, and they're someone who is of legal age. But eliminating those factors that are already illegal and would still be illegal if prostitution were to ever be fully legalized in this country, I don't see the inherent harm in the act of prostitution itself. Some John or Jane wants to get their rocks off with someone else. They willingly pay for a service, that service being intercourse or whatever other sex act they ask for from the sex worker, and the sex worker willingly engages. So horrible, am I right? The stigmatization of prostitution really plays into how fucking prudish this country is when it comes to sex. Sex is an incredibly intimate and beautiful act that should only be between a married man and a married woman, and the only reason they should be having sex in the first place is to create a child. And prostitution and having sex in general, just for the fun of it, undermines that yada yada yada. You've heard the whole song and dance before, I'm sure. Humans are not hardwired like that, no matter how much we try to force ourselves to be. By and large, we like sex. We want sex. And humans will turn to various different avenues in order to get sex, and that includes paying a prostitute to have some fun with. We like whatever feels good, physically and mentally, and sex often is pleasurable in both regards, but I wouldn't know that, of course. And humans want to experience that sensation as much as possible, and so long as that remains the case, there will always be a market for prostitution. And fuckfaces like Andrew Cuomo take advantage of the prudish attitude this country collectively has against sex by moral crusading against prostitution and trying to frame the act of paying for sex or being a sex worker as disgusting and demoralizing, yet at the same time hide behind the very same sex workers they're trying to demonize, who have been at the brunt of exploitation and violence, and use them as nothing more than a gotcha to say this is what people who support the full legalization of prostitution are a-okay with. First off, let's get what I hope is obvious out of the way. People like Andrew Cuomo do not give a single shit about sex workers who are exploited and abused. In fact, he probably looks down at these sex workers as low-class trash. 2, prostitution being legalized allows for more government regulation of the profession, more health and safety standards, which would in turn mean less of a reason to be de-incentivized to report violence and abuse that may occur. A big reason as to why sex workers are a big target when it comes to violence and abuse is because prostitution is an illegal profession, and so authorities are far more likely to turn a blind eye to any abuse and violence that may occur to prostitutes. And a big reason as to why this is unfortunately the case is the stigma the profession being illegal creates. Prostitutes at the brunt of the violence are criminals too, and on top of that, prostitution is a disgusting and immoral profession, so they must have been asking for this misfortune on some level. I know, if prostitution were to be fully legalized in all 50 states tomorrow, the violence and abuse that many sex workers face wouldn't just disappear overnight. But I think over time, the stigma surrounding it would at least weaken because it would be a legal profession with better protections and better standards, which would in turn hopefully less incentivize sick fucks to abuse sex workers. A few years ago, right here in New York, a serial killer was arrested. Who did he primarily target? Prostitutes. Likely because he knew these would be easier targets that the police would turn a blind eye to. And he was right. He got away with it for decades until, like I said, a few years ago. Had prostitution always been a legal and accepted profession, maybe this sick fuck would wouldn't have murdered these sex workers. Or maybe, at the very least, he would have been caught much sooner and his kill count would have been lower. And prostitutes in a system where the profession is legalized wouldn't have to solely rely on pimps and traffickers who may abuse them themselves for protection. And speaking of safety and protection, I know what you might be thinking. What about STDs? In a system where prostitution is legal, health screenings are not only more encouraged, but is also very likely mandatory, which is already the case in several countries that have legal prostitution. And do you want to know what is commonly the number one reason as to why many sex workers are de-incentivized to get regular health screenings in places where prostitution is completely illegal? The threat of getting arrested. Ironically, keeping prostitution illegal brings about more health and safety risks than there would be if the profession were legal in the first place. And look, I understand, most people don't want to be prostitutes. As in, most people from a young age aren't like, you want to know what I want to do with my life? Sell my body. I understand there are various socioeconomic factors that more or less force one to go into prostitution. And I'm not attempting to discount that. What I am saying is the profession on its own is one that I feel is erroneous to keep illegal and to continue to demonize because, one, like I said, the simple act of paying for sex and the person being paid is willingly engaging and is of legal age is, again, something I view as a completely harmless and victimless crime. And two, I want better regulations and protections to be imposed for sex workers, which is absolutely not going to happen so long as prostitution remains illegal. Anyway, sex work is work, that's all I have to say. Bye-bye.